there we have it. Lisa, thanks for being with us again today.
Happy to. Not happy for the reason, but happy to be here.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, we really appreciate your generosity. This is like your third call with us.
Not a problem.
So, what's the latest?
So, well, I mean, you've heard the good news. The vaccines still work, even with Omicron, if you've had your third booster. Masks still work. We've got some treatments that are approved. But then there's the not so great news. So Omicron has clearly outpaced Delta. It's now about 85% of the infections we're seeing in the US. Delta is still way worse in the sense of the symptoms and the seriousness that it causes. Omicron does tend to come across, particularly in the vaccinated, as more like a cold. We are seeing cases of double infection, Omicron and the flu, as well as Omicron and Delta. It is not a mild form of COVID. Long haul symptoms are still in play. The unvaccinated can still go in the hospital, and we are still seeing significant ICU utilization as well as deaths. We are not peaked in the US yet. I know there's been a lot of media coverage about it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. We're not there yet, particularly in the Midwest. Some of the coast looked like it was peaking for a little while, but it hasn't peaked yet. Omicron is as infectious as the most infectious virus known to man, which is measles. If you remember, the original COVID you could catch in 15 minutes. With Delta, you could catch it in 10 seconds. This one you can catch literally by walking past someone. It has an R of 6, which means every one person basically on average infects 6 people. That means within 10 cycles, if you're infectious and walking through Walmart and you encounter 60 people, you have now essentially infected 360 million people. That's how infectious this is. Most recent data for Omicron shows that those who are triple vaccinated are about 75% protected. That protection goes down to 33% without the third dose. The vast majority, more than 90% of hospitalizations and more than 95% of deaths are still in the unvaccinated, even with Omicron. There was just a study that came out on Sunday from Israel that has been testing a 4th vaccine. It hasn't been tested in a lot of people, but what they're seeing is that it's not providing a significant additional protection against Omicron. Omicron-specific vaccines are in development and in testing, both at Pfizer and Moderna. And this makes sense because Omicron has 35 mutations or more, most of them in that protein spike region, meaning that it's not only more infectious, but it has a better chance of evading at least some of the protection from the vaccines. Delta only had 13 mutations. So far, those who had been infected are mild. Most are younger because most of the older population in the US anyway has been vaccinated. It does appear that those who had previously been infected with COVID, including Delta, can be reinfected with Omicron because the symptoms are different. And it really does, it's 70 times more infectious, but in the nose. That's why you're getting nasal symptoms. So it affects the bronchus and the upper respiratory more than it does the lungs. You don't see quite as much pneumonia with Omicron as you did with Delta. It actually spreads about 10 times less in the lungs than Delta did. Hospitalization with Omicron is found across all ages, but we're seeing it especially in ages 18 and under. And it does not appear to be treatable with the monoclonal antibodies, meaning that really early treatment is no longer an option. Pretty much what everybody's saying is we're all going to be exposed at some point. We'll all catch Omicron. 40% of those who do are still asymptomatic, so you don't necessarily know. Right now, the US is seeing about more than 800,000 cases, new cases a day, and about 100,000 hospitalizations a day. Last week, we hit 1.35 million new cases reported in a day. That's a record. The variant infection is still coming. There was a new variant that was identified in France 3 weeks ago. It came from a Cameroonian visitor. Doesn't mean that's where it evolved. But Cameroon, like most of sub-Saharan Africa, is between 3 and about 9% of their population vaccinated. So with those low levels of vaccination and global travel, we're going to continue to have variants emerge. Normally, what a virus does is over time, it does exactly what Omicron has done. It becomes way more infectious, but far less virulent. It causes far less disease. It makes sense. You don't want to, if you're a virus, you don't want to kill off your host. You have to keep replicating. So Omicron is a typical progression for a virus. However, it doesn't mean that we still aren't at risk of developing a variant that completely evades the vaccine, and then we're all back to square one. Right now, and I will tell you, I look at the world and the US stats for COVID every day. I've never seen it jump this fast. So this is real. Right now, the World Health is reporting more than 333 million confirmed cases of COVID globally, which is likely significantly underreported, and more than 5.6 million deaths. In the US, we have more than 68 million confirmed cases and 874,000 deaths. That's about 1/5 of the world. So way more than our per capita. That's pretty much the update at this point. And I know that's not fun. So what we're telling churches here in Cincinnati, of the 65 churches I have, probably 15 right now have gone back to all virtual. The rest of them are doing hybrid with masking requirements, distancing requirements. They've pretty much canceled choirs. Our choirs are wonderful, but they're not always professionals, which means they have to be together when they both practice and perform, because they have to be able to hear the other parts. That's a lot of together time, even with masks on. Congregations singing, we've said as long as you're masked, that's fine. We're all in cold weather. We're all in heated weather. That means that the air is drier, which means aerosolization of virus particles will go further. So 6 feet distance is an absolute minimum. Most of our churches are at minimum in person. Most people are staying home at this point. Cincinnati's hospitals are overrun. All of our hospital systems, and we have a ton of them here in Cincinnati, have canceled elective surgeries and anything that isn't COVID related or an emergency at this point. We probably are going to be facing 4 to 8 weeks more of this. The numbers, I think, will start to come down, but remember, hospitalizations and deaths lag the peak of infection. And since we're not at the peak of infection yet, we're at least 4 weeks of this kind of these kinds of numbers. Stunned you all into silence.
Before this last jump, our congregation had maybe 1 or 2 of their family members. Now everybody's family has got it. Everybody's grandkids have it. We had to cancel our regular session meeting and meet via Zoom because 2 of our people had to stay home because they got it from their grandkids. So it's everywhere. And we had a prayer request for one of the grandchildren who's developed diabetes from it.
And that's not atypical.
Unfortunately, that's affecting the rest of that child's life now.
Right.
He was too young to be vaccinated. It was, unfortunately. So it's everywhere. I mean, we're still meeting in church. We haven't had choir. We've only had, soloists here and there, but we're masked and everything else, but we've canceled anything else that's in person.
Yeah, we have a gathering, which is the Presbytery meeting coming up in February, and we're back to Zoom. And we'll be probably through May at this point. All of our commission meetings, all of our council meetings are all by Zoom. So it's a time to be extra cautious at this point, particularly with so many young unvaccinated. I'm smug that I didn't go home to my parents for Christmas because my entire family came down with it. And my dad was in the hospital for a couple of days, came out with clear lungs and 2-week supply of prednisone. But and they are triple vaccinated and extremely cautious. So it's extremely easy to catch.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Folks who have tested positive but are asymptomatic, whether it be before the vaccines or now, is there any research to show whether they will have a tendency to remain asymptomatic even if exposed and contracted again? That's
a really good question. And the answer is no, depending on the variant. So if they were asymptomatic with the original one, because there are enough, so most of the mutations are in the protein spike, which isn't the infectious part of the virus. It's just the part that attaches to the cell and gets the mRNA in there. But because Omicron attacks a different part of the respiratory system than Delta does, there have been cases where someone who has had Omicron gets Delta, or someone who's had Delta gets Omicron. There have been also reported cases of those who had the original virus who got Delta. So it's not that it's a different virus each time, but you're not, all of the antibodies you have are not active against all of the variant parts. That said, those people who are vaccinated, and this is not necessarily true for someone who's had it and is not vaccinated. Those people who are vaccinated, if the virus gets back in their system, the chances of them getting significant disease is significantly attenuated because the antibodies that emerge will snip the mRNA. So they're not only not as seriously diseased, but they're also not quite as infectious. So they're not shedding as much whole virus. For those people who have had COVID but are not vaccinated, that immune protection is very, very weak for the most part, even if they've had Delta and survived that. And so that's not the same as being vaccinated. Excuse me, I need to get my dog. Hold on. Jesse, stop it. Sorry.
Yeah, I hear the argument, and I want every bit of ammunition that I can throw out there. But I hear the argument, well, I tested positive in 2020, but I was asymptomatic, so it's not going to affect me the next time around. And I'm going to quote you.
Yeah, absolutely. No, asymptomatic the first time around can still get symptoms.
Right.
Yeah.
Thanks.
And I mean, if you listen to what Kevin said, there's always those long haul things that may not show immediately. And so even if you're not feeling bad and you've got it, you're still potentially possibly get something like a long haul, particularly central nervous system, I'm not doing this in English very well, but cognitive dysfunction, some neurological problems, including gait problems and trouble with balance, the ability for it to get into the pancreas and cause diabetes, the ability for it to get into the thymus and the thyroid and cause metabolic problems. It gets into the GI tract. We've talked about cardiac issues, and certainly anybody who's had any lung infection is going to have lung scarring. So all of those things are still in play, even if you don't really have symptoms.
I hear comments about how the vaccines cause heart problems in children. Is that?
That's extremely rare. And unfortunately, our media likes to play that kind of thing up. So that is a very rare side effect. It's not well understood, I will say that. And I've not pursued that one very much, but it is listed as a rare side effect of the vaccine. All medicine and most of the supplements we take are controlled toxicity. Nothing is perfectly safe. Any other questions?
I was just curious. This is kind of going off on another tangent. When your churches returned, did they come back? Like one thing that's happening to us, I don't feel like I have to go all remote because there are only 5 of us,
Yeah.
So and then we'll have 17 to 20 online that people are really into the online. Did your congregations come back before they went remote again, or?
Yeah, not all of my congregations. I have, trying to think, of the 65, I have 2 that never came back. And that partly was for other reasons. One, the pastor got very ill. It was not COVID related. And so they just shut it down. But between the elders and him, and this is one of my small African-American churches, once he recovered, he's just been sending out worship material every week, and they've been literally doing it that way. And they have a population, because of their demographic, that is at high risk. So they've not yet come back. Almost all of the other churches came back in one way, shape, or form. Many of them, we were blessed in the sense that we were offering out digital grants the November before this hit. And so most of the churches who took the digital grants pivoted to equipment that they could start to live stream or do Facebook Live or something like that. So we were sort of lucky that way. Almost all of our churches have either stayed hybrid, and hybrid could include, with some of the really small ones out at the edge of Appalachia, just mailing out worship materials. One of them actually created like a little library and put it outside their church and put it in there in hard copy. And they actually put out more than they have congregation members, which meant people were picking it up off the street, which was pretty cool. So hybrid has a couple of different meanings. We have such tiny churches in some of my remote areas. Every single one of them right now is hybrid in one way, shape, or form, other than the one that didn't come back.
Mhm.
So there's none that's just fully back.
Right. And in the numbers are smaller, obviously.
Yeah, the
Or in
number in the
person.
sanctuary are smaller. I think if you count the ones that are online, they will say that in some of the congregations have declined. And they know some people have left and gone to churches that are open, and there's all of that kind of wrangling. But I've got a church that has 750 people online, and they've just elected an online diaconate so that they can keep up with them. So some of them are rocking and rolling with it, and we'll keep that in a significant way.
How does that online diaconate work?
That's a really good question. We haven't quite figured that out yet, but what they've done is they've elected deacons whose job it is simply to keep up with those for whom they have online contact. So emails, the same way your deacons would send a birthday card, they do, an email check-in. How can we pray for you? Can we add you to the prayer list? Here's the kinds of missions we're supporting. Is there anything you're passionate about that we can get involved in? And can you support our missions? In some cases, they haven't gone all the way to membership yet, which of course has per capita implications, but some of them have. Some of the smaller ones have said, daughter of a prominent member wants to be listed as a member, and she lives in Colorado, and they did. So
Nice.
all emerging, all of it's emerging right now. Anything else? I know this is such a hard time. It really is. We're in our 4th calendar year of this now, and everybody's tired. Nobody wants to wear masks, but it's still a good thing to do. At least
Actually, when you're outside, masks are very welcome because it keeps your face warm.
Exactly right. You'd be wearing them anyway. I happened to look at the calendar for 2022 today for a different purpose, and I'm like, oh, thank goodness. Easter is late this year. We have a chance. It's not until like the 17th. So it's not those early Easters where you're still going to be inside. Maybe we'll be clearer by then.
Yeah. So what is your recommendation to congregations to go remote?
Yeah, I've told my congregations, if you can't distance and you can't mandate masks, you should be remote at this point, because it's just not a good place to be. They don't all, I can't mandate anything. I have no authority.
Right.
So some of them follow it and some of them don't. But for the most part, they're being exceptionally cautious. And I think people are they're self-regulating a little bit more. They hear the stories about, oh, so-and-so's family got together for Christmas and they all came down with COVID. And so I've got a lot of parishioners who are just self-regulating and staying home on their own. And the cold and the snow doesn't help that. People stay home anyway when it's cold and snowy. So that might work in our advantage, actually.
Masks and Omicron, any data on that?
Well, the masks work. They work for everything. Omicron is no smaller or bigger than the original virus, so the same data apply. So N95s are the gold standard. KN95s are a good standard. There's another one, KF94, I think. Just means it was made in Korea. It's proven to be just as good. The paper surgical masks work really well if you can double mask better. Cloth masks are lousy, but if you can double mask with one of the others and or cut a piece of vacuum cleaner bag and put it in the cloth mask, those things are designed to keep dust at a minimum. They're actually pretty good. So that's what we've been saying. But yes, definitely masked, definitely distanced, all of the same precautions that you had this time last year, just as the vaccines were coming in.
A new vacuum cleaner bag, right?
A new one, not a dusty one.
Thank you for making that distinction.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you don't want to be breathing that stuff in.
That's important information.
That is important information. I'll make that correction when I say that in the future.
I think I saw that on MacGyver too. Well, I think we're inundated right now.
Yeah, I know. I realize it comes across like a little dark rain cloud sometimes. But as always, if you have questions, if I don't know the answer, I'm happy to look it up. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Well, I think we'll go off in our corners and try to process all of this.
Yeah, it's a lot. I think everybody was hoping this would be the beginning of the end, and it might be. Fauci and the CDC are saying don't count on that this is the beginning of the end of COVID. It is an endemic virus. We will be living with this forever. The key is to get as much of the globe vaccinated as possible, to see if the pharmaceutical companies can come up with improved vaccines against the variants as they're spreading. It takes time doesn't take much time to develop it now that they got the mRNA sequencing down, but the testing and the approval process still takes some time. So they are developing, they have developed Delta and they're testing that. They're in the process of developing Omicron vaccines. I don't think those are in clinical trials yet, but they will be. And the world is ready to start to approve these. These are very safe, but they need to get out there. We, as a developed world, are sending a ton of vaccines to sub-Saharan Africa, to South America, to Southeast Asia. I know Europe is doing the same. So is Russia and China, but I've not seen any data on their vaccines, so I don't know how robust they are. But we're trying. It's been really, really hard. I do a fair bit of work in Kenya and in other parts of Africa with a board that I'm on. You know, trying to get vaccines out to some of those villages is it's crazy. And so some of it is just hard work.
In the future, is this going to be like the flu vaccine every year?
Yeah, I think so. You know, like I said, the study from Israel that came out that said the fourth vaccine, the second booster, really didn't add a whole lot. And so there's two types of immunity. There's the circulating antibodies. And if the body isn't constantly being challenged by the virus, those circulation numbers go down just over time. That's normal. But there's cellular immunity too. So there's two kinds of cells, essentially. It gets more complicated than this. There's T cells and B cells. T cells are the memory cells. So if a virus comes in after you've been vaccinated or you've had a virus, it'll recognize it. And what it does is it primes the B cells to go ahead and make the antibodies again. And so what's happening is the cellular immune system is what's holding this together right now. The antibody titer, the level will go down over time. That's very, very normal. So the boosters are an attempt to keep the antibody levels high so that you're immediately attacking any virus that goes in. That's what's stopping the pandemic. That's why they're looking at boosters all the time. The flu vaccine is an annual vaccine because there are so many different flu strains and they mutate very, very fast. So there's a whole organization called the Fan Flu Organization that looks at the flu that is emerging the end of summer, usually the end of May, because their cycle is different. And they then tell the pharmaceutical companies, here's the flu strains we're seeing. So the pharmaceutical companies make the vaccine against those flu strains, and that's what you get in your arm in September and October. If those mutate significantly or the strain changes, that vaccine could be less effective. And we've seen that over time too. I think what's going to happen, and this is sort of what's being predicted now, is that we will have, once we get this under control, we will have annual COVID vaccines. They're also trying to come up with a vaccine for the respiratory syncytial virus, which is the other flu-ish type of virus that comes around seasonally, and give those together. So you'll get flu, you'll get RSV, and you'll get COVID either in 1 or 2 shots, depending on how it comes out. But yes, I've said this since the beginning. I think this is an annual thing for us now. So it's like, put out your left arm and put out your right arm too.
How much data is there on how long the booster lasts? I mean, what is it, 6 months and going strong? Is that the
6 months and pretty much going strong? But again, though, if you're quantifying that by the amount of antibody that's circulating, that's naturally going to come down over time anyway. So it's a little bit of a false number. The T cells are still primed. So if you get and that's why the variants are so important, because with the number of mutations increasing on the piece that makes it infectious, there's going to get a tipping point where the vaccine, the cellular immune system isn't going to recognize that protein anymore. And so then you get infected with it, then you'll get antibodies against that. So as long as it's Omicron-like, where it's really not quite as virulent, doesn't cause as much disease, that's not a bad thing. If you remember when we first talked about this 2 years ago, of the 7 coronavirus strains that are known to man, 4 of them just cause the common cold and do no more than that. And so the fact that Omicron has devolved to an upper respiratory virus is really not a surprise. And we're just hoping it stays there and we don't get additional variants that take us back to Delta days.
Well, once again, Lisa, thank you. Incredible amount of information you've given us.
Yeah, I'm sorry to overwhelm you, but it's important to know, and I appreciate your reaching out. But like I said, if you've got other questions, do not hesitate to get with me. If I don't know the answer, I'll go find it.
We'll see you in 3 months.
There you go. And we'll be celebrating the end, right?
Thank you.
All right, you all be blessed. You take care.
You should end the call by saying, how about those Bengals?
How about those Bengals? That's right. It's been a 31-year drought. I've lived here 32 years, so you know how long we've all suffered.
And
I grew up in New York City. I'm still a Giants fan. They're not very good right now either.
to throw it out, I've never heard a whistle thrown in the middle of a forward pass. So whatever that was, I'm glad they didn't let it stop the play.
No
You don't
idea.
blow a whistle when the pass is in the air. You just
I
don't.
think they just got
Weird.
excited.
Weird.
All right.
All right, we'll keep rooting for the Bengals.
Okay.
All right.
Y'all take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.